All right, welcome everybody. Continuing in the Rambam series. May do another one after today. Might say we've learned enough Rambam after today. We'll see at the end of it how we feel. All right, everybody see the document on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so continuing last week, whatever part last week was, six, I think. We talked about martyrdom, Kiddush Hashem, and Chalul Hashem, sanctification of his name and desecration of his name. And we didn't finish it, so we're going to finish that topic today. All right. So we want to understand the Torah's commandments to sanctify his name is a positive mitzvah and avoid desecrating it, which is a negative mitzvah as defined by the Rambam. So the definition, Kiddush Hashem, act that brings honor to God, Torah, or Judaism. This is a positive commandment. I think it's articulated to carry his name in a positive manner. Hilul Hashem, acts that bring disgrace to God, Torah, or Judaism. Actual negative commandment. Now, notice when it says Judaism here, I don't think the word Judaism is actually mentioned in Torah, but if you're out there visibly Jewish, people are going to see you and they are going to reflect negatively on us. If you're out there in a white shirt, a kippah, a peyot, you see women dressed not modestly, don't be gawking at them because then people are going to think, oh, look what these Jews do. There's already rumors about us running the pornography industry and all of that, and we don't need to be feeding those types of things, those types of stereotypes. So, an example: Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, big fan. He's got a book called Minchat Shlomo, I think it is, where he debunks every claim that electricity is a malacha, which you cannot do on Shabbat. So, I'm a big fan of him for that reason. So he postulates that we should not have a minion blocking airplane aisles for prayer, leading others to criticize Jewish behavior. I recently experienced this. I went to New York in the morning, and if you look at the app My Zamanim, it tells you, the latest time to say the Shema, which is going to be a few minutes after I landed, which I didn't have to. I only went with the carry-on, so I didn't have to go do baggage claim and all that. If I would have done that, then I would have been late for doing that. But boarding was a few minutes after the earliest time that you can put on a talit. So that also would have been an issue if you're one of these ones that does the whole lengthy service and all of this. For me, I do pretty much the abridged version of everything, so I was able to get all of it done before I got on the plane. But others who do not do it that way, they would be blocking aisles on airplanes, and people would say, "How rude is this? These people, I can't believe it," whatever. So he poskins you should not be doing things like that, even if it's something, which is usually Kiddush Hashem. We're saying the Shema, we're putting out the fill and all of this. Um, we have to be considerate of the society that we live in because of the way that people look at us. Because if they have a negative effect on us, even if they don't harm you in the situation, what cause is this going to bring to the Jewish people later on if we're giving people negative impressions about us? So something to be mindful of. So the standard depends on one's prominence. The greater leaders are held to higher accountability. Example given: a rude Torah scholar causes more scandal than a child. A child you expect to shove people out of his way in a lunch line, where look at who's that guy that's attacking Asher all the time? Litvin. He's a Chabad rabbi. Says the nastiest things. He's not even someone you would want to associate with as a non-Jew. But this is someone who's a leader of a community, who's educating people on how to behave. And Chabad at that. People always say, oh, Chabad, they're the nicest people, they're the most friendly, do anything for anybody. And then you see examples like him, and he's not the only one. And you start to see multiple examples of these Chabad rabbis. And clearly they don't represent all of Chabad, but when you run into enough of these examples, it's no longer an isolated incident. So now he's representing Chabad. So on a smaller scale, we want to do the same thing as representatives of the Jewish people. So we see these mitzvot. I like to capitalize Hebrew words. are not clearly defined the way it is defined to either put on tefillin as a positive mitzvah or not to mix wool and linen, shotness, as a negative commandment. It's not so clearly defined. Do this or don't do that. It's kind of a general commandment that we have to keep in mind at all times that affect things that are not specifically mentioned. Okay, three categories of Hilul Hashem, desecration of God's name. When you behave in a way that brings Judaism or Torah or God into disrepute by virtue of your behavior. This is the common definition. This is what we call, even if there is no technical violation, meaning even if you're not transgressing anything else, if your behavior brings Torah into disgrace, that could be a Hilul Hashem. Public disgrace, behavior that causes observers, Jews or non-Jews, to disrespect Judaism. Example, violating ethical norms like being dishonest. Even if it's technically permissible, they will say, look how Jews behave, telling people not to convert or saying we don't have to return a lost object to a non-Jew. Okay, I put these examples in here because I actually wrote down something that I wanted to record a video on like a month or so ago, but I didn't do it because I had all this other stuff going on. But I open up Facebook and I see this sincere guy. He says, I love the Jewish people. I love Hashem and his Torah. Is it possible that I can convert? And there's people in other countries, they don't even know that you can convert because in their area, it's not even an option. So this guy sounds very sincere, and I scroll to the comments, and everyone's like, "You don't have to convert. You don't need to. You can follow 7 laws. If you really want to, yes, it's possible, but you need to know that you don't have to." It's like, what disgusting behavior. I mean, who else would do this? I mean, who else would walk up, hey, I see you have cars for sale. I'm looking for a car. Is this something I could buy? You don't need to buy this car. I see you're walking. I mean, who behaves like this? It just makes us look so stupid. And you see the same thing about returning lost object to a Jew, because I say something all the time that many people don't know. And of course, it's true, it's accurate. I quote it verbatim, it's verifiable. You can look it up and see that I'm 100% correct. So that means obviously there's something wrong with me and I should be attacked for saying it. So I say all the time, when you hear people saying it's a mitzvah to return a lost object to a Jew, which is true, but it's also in the halakha that if a Jew eats non-kosher food as a way to thumb his nose at God, you are not allowed to return his lost object because it would be that you are strengthening evil by helping an individual like this, a Jew who behaves like this. And not only are you not allowed to return it to him, you are not allowed to benefit from anything. So if he drops his wallet, you can't even say, okay, well, I'm not allowed to return this to him because it's like I'm strengthening evil, but cash, it's an inanimous object. I can, pay my bills with that, right? No, you're not allowed to benefit anything from it. But a Jew, it's not a mitzvah to return his lost object. That's true. But it's considered praiseworthy, meaning a Jew who eats non-kosher food as a way to be a conscious act to be rebellious against God, walking with a non-Jew, they both drop their wallet at the same time. You see it. You do not return the wallet to the Jew, and it is praiseworthy to give the wallet to the non-Jew who dropped his. So people will attack me all the time and say, you don't have to return it to. Think about what you're saying. So I see this person, one of our neighbors, and he drops his wallet. And you want to advertise that the law says I don't have to because he's not one of us. I don't have to return it to him. But I could if I wanted to. It's Jeffrey Epstein. This guy, he's, doing whatever you want to say about him. We can return his wallet if we want. What does it sound like to people when they see you saying these types of things? It makes us look ridiculous. And so we should not be doing that type of thing. Okay, so one guy actually recently, he was arguing about that. Oh, he called me an idiot. He says, you can return your lost object to this. I'm like, Rambam specifically says no. He said, well, he says else, and I showed him Al Chabad, the Mishnah Torah, and he laughed at me. He says, I don't get my halakha from Chabad. I said, okay, well, I'm at work. I'm not at home. I don't have my physical copy with me at work. Does the physical copy say something different than what Chabad says? Because if so, then I'm willing to take the correction, But if not, then you're just making fun of me for being correct. And you're not debunking anything that I said, meaning You're just making fun of me because you don't like the way I presented the true and correct information while not pointing out anything's wrong with it. Not only did he not show that there was anything wrong with what I said from Chabad.org, somebody else did have the physical copy and they messaged me like, yeah, this is exactly what you claim it says. But he claims, well, Rambam says elsewhere in these times you're able to, because if you can return it to a non-Jew, then for sure you can return it to a Jew. So halakha lamaseh is that we do it anyway. Of course, he provided no source for this. So he expects me to just believe that Rambam specifically says this is prohibited, but elsewhere Rambam says that you can do what Rambam says you can't do. And his source is just trust me, bro. Whatever. And as for halakha lamaseh, this is the practical halakha that we do today. Why do we do that today? The reason why we do that today is because they incorrectly call everybody Tanokh Shanishba. A Tanokh Shanishba is someone who doesn't know any better. They were raised by non-Jews, didn't even know they were Jewish, never learned the law, never learned what you're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. So today, everybody that has internet, listens to Shiurim online, attends a synagogue, knows what Shabbat is. They drive to a synagogue publicly. They bring their keys in there. They make no effort to hide it. Well, this is a Tanokh Shanishba. This is someone that doesn't know any better. Someone that attends the synagogue, that teaches what Shabbat is. That's a Tanokh Shanishba. No, we call every apostate. We call everyone who knows what the religion is, who wants no part of it, who actively fights against it. We call them a Tanokh Shanishba. So therefore, we can return their lost object from Halacha. Says they are not a Tanokh Shanishba, they are an apostate, and we're not allowed to return it to them. That's why we do it today. That's wrong. So this is the kind of stupidity that you run into online. It's unfortunate there is no shortage. Okay, private indifference, sinning deliberately, not out of temptation, but apathy towards God's will. This is what I was just talking about. Temptation, we all fall short. Sometimes that's why we have a concept called teshuvah. Try harder next time. You missed the mark this time. You don't just give up. You try harder next time, and you improve. Every year, you get better and better. That is different than apathy towards God's will. Saying, I just don't care what He wants. I'm going to do what I want. The example: eating non-kosher food simply because I don't care. I'm not convinced. I know this is the halakha, and I really like cheeseburgers, so I prefer to do that anyway. That is different than just falling short. That's different from giving into temptation and doing teshuvah and trying harder not to relapse. Although that's not to say it's okay to give in and eat a ham sandwich, because even in private, meaning nobody saw you do it, you're not doing it publicly, your fellow Jews, your non-Jews, they're not going to be disappointed. They're not going to be using this against you, even if it's only you in the privacy of your own home doing it. You still had apathy towards the law. Even if nobody saw you do it, Hashem still sees that you were indifferent about it. He sees that it was not a big enough priority to you. So it's better in private than to do it publicly, but you still don't show the level of respect that you should, and that we cannot hide from God. He sees it. Okay, back to martyrdom. Kiddush Hashem, giving life when required. Example given, refusing idolatry. There's the big three: idolatry, certain types of sexual immorality, and murder. Those are the three that you should, I emphasize should, be willing to give your life for, even though there's examples of history of many who did not. And Rambam just wrote a long letter speaking to them and telling them why it's kind of okay that you didn't. There's lots of things you were supposed to do that you didn't. This is just one of many. Your mitzvot still count. You still have to do the things you're supposed to do, even though you missed the mark here. This might be a bigger sin than other ones, but at the end of the day, you're still here. You still have to do all of the mitzvot that you can. So martyrdom is only mandated, saying it's required for the big three sins: idolatry, murder, and sexual immorality. Although we saw examples of other times when it could be expected of you for lesser things. But he says an interesting point that this is even true with murder, whether it's avodah zarah, or it's sexual. And this is true with either of those. If you murdered somebody to save your life when you're not allowed to do so. So here the Rambam makes an interesting distinction between before the fact and after the fact. So we know murder is one of the ones that you're supposed to be prepared to give your life. So if somebody comes up and hands you a knife and they put a gun to your head and they say, stab this other person, you're supposed to be willing to let them shoot you because you can't commit the act of murder. Now, if you were to stab that other person, that might save your life. That might prevent the guy from shooting you. But who's to say your life is worth more than the person you're about to stab? So this is the example where you're supposed to be prepared to die rather than murder another person. In that example, you would be permitted to stab the person that had his gun to your head because he's a rodef to you. He's a threat to your life. So you would be allowed to stab him to save your life, but you would not be allowed to commit the act of murder. So that's the example when you should be prepared to give your life or die trying to save your life, but rather than murder somebody else. So what does this mean before the fact or after the fact? Before the fact, when you're put in this position, if you ask, should I bow down to the idol or die? The answer is, you should die. Should I rape this woman or die? The answer is, you should die. Should I murder this person to save my life? The answer is no. You should die rather than murder that person. That's the answer that we should give before. Halakhically, this is the answer. Um, but once you did it after the fact, then now the Rambam says the following: any act that was done under coercion or fear of death is not legally punishable. So if you murdered an innocent person in order to save your life, you would not get any penalty on the part of the Bet Din. If you worshiped a pagan deity, your only sin, which is a serious sin, is you desecrated God's name by failing to give your life, which is bad. It's very bad. But technically, you're not an idolater and you're not a murderer and you're not a rapist because Rambam says, even though halakhically you should have given your life, you acted under duress. You acted under compulsion. You acted because of fear for your life. Now, this itself is very important in the forced conversion scenario. Remember, this letter was about people who did not want to die. So they made the statement, the Shahada, whatever it is in Islam, they converted outwardly to Islam. And the unnamed rabbi that Rambam didn't name was telling them, you should have died. And because you didn't, even Christians gave their life, we see ourselves as above Christians. So even if they're willing to die, you didn't. That's a Hilul Hashem. And now, not only are you free of your obligation to put on tefillin to keep Shabbat, if you do it, you're desecrating God's name. You are sinning and doing something that you're going to be punished for anytime you do any mitzvah whatsoever because you didn't give up your life and voluntarily become a martyr. So this is the letter that Rambam was responding to. Because he was talking to these people in the forced conversion scenario, because what it's saying is the following: even if they should have given their lives, Rambam maintains that they did not have to. But after the fact, they're still Jews in good standing, unlike what the unnamed rabbi told them, that their mitzvah no longer counts anymore. So this is an extremely important distinction because the Rambam makes between before the fact and after the fact. And the Rambam maintains that after the fact, there is no punishment that is attaching to them because they are called anusim. Anusim means like the people who were forced into it by virtue of compulsion. This is like B'nai Anusim. You've heard this concept of B'nai Anusim. B'nai is like the children. Anusim, the ones who were forced. So it's usually talking about the Spanish Jews who were kicked out of Spain in 1492. So people oftentimes they find out that, hey, my last name is Torres, and Torres is somehow a Jewish name. That means my ancestors have been Jewish for 500 years, and then they want to convert. They're like, I'm one of the B'nai Anusim. Not only my mom didn't know, but my grandmother didn't know, my great grandmother didn't know. For 500 years, nobody knew that we were part of this group. But somehow we've always been Jewish because we've always married only other Jews who also didn't know that they were Jewish for 500 years. Whatever, we convert them. Now there's no more doubt. Now they're Jewish. But that's that term, B'nai Anusim. It's usually returning to the Spanish people from the Spanish Inquisition. Involuntary martyrdom. Rambam's view is that this is forbidden. If somebody tells you to violate Shabbat or they will kill you, then you are obligated to violate Shabbat. even if you feel so strong about Shabbat that you don't want to transgress it, uh, Rambam would call you a suicide if you said, "I'd rather die than violate Shabbat." He says it's not permitted. Suicide is not allowed. So there, he's telling you you must violate Shabbat. I guess under pekuach nefesh to save your own life, even if you don't want your life to be saved, you're not allowed to commit suicide. So you have to do it. The historical reality. Many Jews chose martyrdom beyond the big three, like during the Crusades. In terms of volunteerism, if they surround a city and they said, "Give us a Jew to kill, or we will wipe out the whole city." So the halacha is clear. We are not allowed to pick a Jew and send him out. That means every Jew must die. They must all be killed, rather than one Jew be given over to the enemy. So it doesn't matter if okay, one person is going to die. That's terrible. But are we going to let 2,000 of us get killed in order to save that one? Yes. If they are picking the one, his life matters, and we can't give it up. We can't choose one to give up, and we can't allow them to choose which one of us gets killed. So it's not allowed. Even if that means the whole city's going to be wiped out, because the rule that you can't murder or cause murder to save lives. That means even if you're saving a lot of lives, it's not one to one. It's we don't do a numbers game. So the question people ask is, could a person volunteer? Could a person say, "I will give my life so that the city will be saved"? Or what about a person who jumps on a grenade to save other people? The question becomes, if Rambam says when there's not an obligation to give your life, you're not allowed to do so. So then the question becomes, is this person a sinner? We would hate to envision someone who jumps on a grenade as someone who's sinning when in this heroic act he saved the lives of lots of other people. So it's an interesting question because according to Rambam, you're not allowed to do that. But the counter argument is that in cases like jumping on a grenade or in cases like volunteering, if the person's going to die anyway, meaning if he does not volunteer to jump on the grenade, everyone's going to probably get killed in the room. So that's a little different, meaning you're not talking about a person who would otherwise live, who volunteers to give up his life. You're talking about a person who would die with everybody else, but he's willing to step forward and save everybody else. So it might be in that particular case, Rambam would allow a voluntary martyrdom, but according to the letter of the law, he says it's not allowed to be considered a suicide. Although, if you're in this situation, I would not tell you to be concerned with what Rambam says. He says things that he has no authority on, like who gets a share in Olam Haba and who does not, based on what they believe and what they don't. As much as I respect Rambam, that's a decision that Hashem will make, uh, and I don't think Hashem has to consult with Rambam on it. So this is a similar type of thing. I think he injects himself into matters that are non legal, like with what punishments are going to be after this world. I don't think that's his place. Okay, Holocaust and martyrdom. The victims had no choice to convert. Unlike classic martyrdom scenarios, let's take the Holocaust. First, it's a little bit of a difficult issue because what is the sanctification of God's name? When you give your life, it seems to presuppose a certain element of choice or volition, meaning the Crusades, they go over to me and say, "You become a Christian or I will kill you." And a person declares, "My commitment to God is so great that I will die before I renounce God and his Torah." So that's called sanctification of God's name because you're placing your allegiance to God even above your own life. And that is stating how important that is, but that's because you had the choice. You could have become a Christian or profess Christianity, and you did. Now, in the case of the Holocaust, what's interesting is that there was not that element of choice, meaning Hitler didn't say, "Become a Christian, you'll be saved, and if not, I will kill you." In fact, there were Jews who converted to Christianity for various reasons, and they died at Auschwitz as well. So, possible justifications to say it was a Kiddush Hashem. It was a noble acceptance of death. There was I saw a video. There was this over in Ukraine and Russia. They're killing each other with drones. They have these kamikaze drones. They have cameras on them. And one guy, he was like laying on the ground. There was a motorcycle in the background, so I think he crashed the motorcycle, and I think maybe he broke his back or something. He was paralyzed because the way he was laying on his side, like propped up on his elbow, and he had like his legs crossed. It looked like he placed one leg over the other, and he's just laying there watching this drone. The drone comes in and it moves from side to side, and he just sits there watching. Let's do it. I know you're gonna fly into me and blow up, and this is the end, so let's do it. He didn't display any fear, any begging, none of that. He didn't try to get up and run away, which tells me he probably couldn't. And he just sat there and he just watched it fly into him and it blew up and he was dead. So he took it like a man. So that's one way you could say that they had a noble acceptance of death. They accepted their fate. That's one way to look at it. Being killed as Jews, Rambam hints that this qualifies as a Kiddush Hashem, meaning they were singled out as a Jew, not being killed in a car crash as a random victim that happens to be Jewish, but being specifically targeted because you were Jewish. Um, there's a way to say that that was a Kiddush Hashem. Although, I mean, in fairness, there were a lot of non-Jews that were killed. They were not targeted for being Jewish, so what do we say about them? There were people, non-Jews who were not even alcoholics, but their father was an alcoholic. So Hitler decided, you have genetics because your father was an alcoholic, and we don't want your kind here, so you were killed also. I don't think we should minimize what happened to other non-Jewish victims in that tragedy. So I guess in some way there would be something noble about what they went through, just not specifically a Kiddush Hashem. But I don't think in any way it should be minimized, the other victims that experienced horrible things. Okay, public versus private scenarios. That's another metric that we need to consider. Public. Now, when it comes to Lashon Hara, Rambam says public is 3 people. Later, Hafethaim says the definition of public should be 10 people. So it's interesting. I wonder if Rambam changes the definition of public to 10 plus Jewish witnesses in this scenario, and he's inconsistent, or if they just put 10 public witnesses as a way to explain the modern definition of public, and they applied that to Rambam, who said public. But Rambam's definition of public is 3 people, at least when it comes to Lashon Hara. But anyway, we'll go with their definition here of public, 10 people. Or it could be they said because we count 10 in a minyan as a quorum, as a congregation. Either way, the concept of public is different than private. So if you have multiple Jewish witnesses, we'll say, plus the oppressor's intent is to destroy Judaism, then martyrdom is required even for minor mitzvot, like changing dress codes. So in that Ravu Manhig course that I took at that yeshiva, that guy was saying that we put our right shoe on first, then we put our left shoe on, then we tie our left shoe, then we tie our right shoe as Jews. There's Kabbalistic reasons for doing that. I'm not so on board with that. But his explanation was if we are told you put your left shoe on first, then your right shoe, you should say, I'd rather die. You should be willing to give your life because this is how, as Jews, we do it. And I asked Asher about that. He's like, that is not the example I would have given. You're only supposed to be able to give your life for those 3 things, and this is not one of them. But what that guy left out is that if this guy is crazy, he just wants everybody to put on your left shoe first. You're not being targeted as a Jew. He's not trying to erase Judaism. If that guy is saying, okay, I don't care how anybody puts their shoes on in whatever order, but you, because you do it a certain way as a Jew, you are going to do the opposite. Now you're being singled out. Now we're trying to erase what Judaism does. That's the point that the guy was making, that you should not be willing to assimilate. So if that's what it takes is to fight to keep Judaism alive, that's where it would be I guess, a Kiddush Hashem to not assimilate and be willing to die to keep Judaism alive. However, he did not articulate that very well. So that's what this is saying. If it's being done publicly and the intent is specifically to stamp out Judaism, then it's you could go beyond the big three: murder, sexual immorality, and idolatry, and you should be willing to give your life for these other things. Although, if you don't, we've already found the examples in the last letter, which we're continuing here, to where we can't really hold it against you if you decide not to. Okay, in private, there's no obligation beyond the big three. So if you are alone in a room with somebody and he tells you to do um, one of these three things, the big three, you should be obligated to keep your life. If he tells you to do anything else, violated Shabbat, whatever, you're not obligated. And in fact, Rambam will call this a suicide, so you'd be prohibited. Okay, he then goes on to say there are times when you must give your life. Does anybody have any questions about that before I go on? About the public versus private and the intent? I think we covered it last week, but I think there's people here this week that weren't here last week, so I want you to see some questions on it. Okay, Rambam then goes on and says there are times you must give your life even for other things. He says the following: if the sin is going to be committed publicly, and publicly is defined as in front of at least 10 Jews, then that's called publicly. There's a minyan. Okay, so maybe for the death case, he considers it a minyan. That's why 10 instead of 3 for public. Okay, we see there are two types of motivations here. When someone tells me, let's take Shabbat, someone says, mow the lawn or I'll kill you. Now, there might be two different reasons why he says, mow the lawn or I'll kill you. One reason might be it has nothing to do with Shabbat. He just wants the lawn mowed. Excuse me. And he's a crazy guy. And he's going to kill me if I don't mow the lawn. Meaning he's not doing it because he wants me to transgress my religion. He's doing it because he just wants me to mow the lawn. He's not doing it to take me away from the Torah. He's doing it for his own benefit. That's one motive. A second motive is to wean me away from my religious observance. So here's what Rambam says. The guy goes over to me and says, mow the lawn or I'll kill you. And he says to me, where 10 Jews are watching. So the Rambam says it depends on what the motivation is. If the motivation is he's not telling me to mow the lawn because he wants me to violate the Torah, he's telling me to mow the lawn because he wants that lawn mowed or he'll kill. So there, Rambam says we do apply pekuach nefesh, even publicly. Go ahead and mow the lawn, save your own life. But Rambam says there are two conditions here. If the avera is going to be public and the motivation is specifically geared towards my repudiation of the Torah, so in such a situation, the duty of martyrdom applies to every single mitzvah of the Torah, no matter how small that would be. It's not only Shabbat, but even something like, if you put on tefillin, I'm going to kill you. The Gemara gives the case of a shoelace. Let's assume there was a minhag that Jewish people wore black shoelaces and non-Jews wore red shoelaces. And the government decrees all Jews must wear red shoelaces or they will be killed. The Gemara says, if the purpose was simply, we want everyone to dress the same, that's fine. Go to red shoelaces. But if the intention is to wean Jews away from their religious observance in a time of religious persecution by creating assimilation, even changing a shoelace is worth becoming a martyr for. Now, it's interesting that the Torah doesn't talk about shoelaces. So here we're talking about rabbinic things. Although I guess you could say there's a there's a Torah commandment not to stray to the left or the right of the rulings of the court, to do according to all that they instruct you. So that's how they usually say rabbinic is on the same level as Torah, because the Torah tells us to follow the instructions of the rabbis. There, I argue it's not just any rabbi, it's specific rabbis. It's rabbis on the Sanhedrin who had the authority to make law, not rabbis after that had no authority to make law. But we see here they're even making a distinction, because if the Sanhedrin said something about shoelaces, and they're making the point that that's on the same level as Torah, because the Torah tells us to follow the rabbinic, Well, what's happening here? The intention is to wean Jews away from religious observance in a time of religious persecution. That even a shoelace is worth becoming a martyr for, because they're saying we can't assimilate, we can't do away with the rabbinic. But what does it say right before that? If the minhag is that everyone wore these shoelaces, and the government decrees all Jews must wear red shoelaces or they'll be killed, then we do away with our minhagim. We assimilate. We drop our minhagim and we don't follow it because they're not trying to stamp out Judaism, but that minhag can be eroded away because minhag is not halacha. But if they're going to claim that it is, then they're making a distinction. This is not specifically from the Torah. If they're allowing us to do away with things that they're claiming is rabbinic with the authority from the Torah. So I find it interesting that they are making a distinction between Torah commandments and rabbinic commandments. Okay, Nazism and Hilul Hashem. Did Nazi decrees like forced Shabbat labor qualify as avodah zarah, intent to destroy Judaism? Rabbinic response is most permitted violating mitzvot in order to survive, suggesting that Nazis aimed at extermination, not religious coercion. So whether you converted out or you were just simply executed, Judaism is being stamped out, no matter which method they were using. Meaning they were not giving a choice to remain Jewish and die or convert and live. So the message seems to be don't assimilate, as opposed to don't be a zealot who prioritizes death over giving up extremism. And there's examples where people have done that. This is the story of Masada. The rabbis told the zealots, do not rise up against the Romans. You can't win. Many Jews are going to be killed as a result. And the zealots said, we don't care. We don't care if a few Jews die, if a lot of Jews die, or if every Jew gets killed. This is our land. We're not going to be told what to do in our land. I don't care how many Jews pay the price. I don't care if Judaism gets wiped off the face of the planet. It's our land. We're not going to be told what to do. You don't care what the rabbis say. We're going to do it. And they did it. And it's a terrible story. And those of you that know the story of Masada know that you looked out from the top of the mountain and you saw tens of thousands of Jews crucified all over the land. And they ended up the Romans built a ramp, which is still there to this day. You can see it. Well, they sent up these little catapults and they were launching things up to the top of the mountain. And they decided they'd rather die and commit suicide rather than go down there and face the death that they caused all of their Jewish brothers to face at the bottom of the mountain. And there's different stories on how they killed themselves, or they all killed themselves and they drew straws, and then they killed everyone until the last two. But it was a terrible example in history that could have been avoided because they chose zealotry um, over doing what they probably should have done. And there are parallels today, whether people like it or not. There are people today that are wanting to do the exact same thing. So ethical behavior to avoid public Hilul Hashem, a lesson that many people need to learn today, especially in the days of TikTok and whatever other examples there are. People are doing disgusting things and they publicly record themselves doing it while other people are suffering. And these videos go viral. And not only is that terrible, but there also seems to be a real lack of people saying, hey, you know what? If that's what you think, why don't you just keep it private? Why do you have to publicize it for the rest of the world to see and look at our behavior? It's really a shame. And I think it is a Hilul Hashem. Okay, balancing religious zeal with communal perception. That's what I was exactly just talking about. Protests that alienate others. I'm not sure what that example of what protest they're talking about is. Anyway, Kiddush Hashem, elevate God's name through actions that inspire respect. Hilul Hashem, avoid actions, whether public or private, that undermine Torah values. In this example that I just gave, If you want to say disgusting things about victims that are suffering in private, okay, that's between you and Hashem. Maybe you've got a good answer that he'll buy. But publicly, the entire public is probably not going to buy some of your arguments. So those things should be kept private. So avoid those types of actions that undermine Torah values. Martyrdom, a complex, content-dependent ideal reserved for extreme cases. Is it complex? Maybe. You know, after the conversion Sunday, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, I was tired. We were going back. Maria was taking me back to the hotel, and that morning she had gotten her mezuzah. She got two of them, and we went from there in Muncie over to the Bronx where the conversion was, and we were headed back, and it was late, and I was tired. Wanted to get back to the hotel. She's like, "Oh, can you put up this mezuzah for me?" I said, "You can put it up. You don't have to have a rabbi put it up for you. You can do it yourself." I don't know how to do it. It's easy. So I pulled up the halakha on my phone, and I was like, "Look, it says right here: anyone who is obligated to have a mezuzah, and women are specifically mentioned, is able to affix a mezuzah." And it's easy. It's on the right. You divide the door into thirds: bottom third, middle third, top third. You put it on the lower part of the top third, facing in, the top slanting in. So on your outside door, it leans in to the room that you're walking in, not the room you're walking out of. That's it. Lower part of the top third on the right, slanting in. And he said the blessing. That's it. Oh, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. All right. I'll put it up for you. She said, "Oh, thank you. Thank you." Such an easy thing to do. But for her, she was stressing out about it. So I went there, pulled it up on my phone, the blessing. That's it. Take the double-sided sticky tape off, set it on there, read the blessing before. That's it. Easy. One blessing covers every mezuzah in the house that you're putting up. I said, you want to put it on the next one? She's like, "No, I don't want to do. You do it. You do it." All right, I did. Easy. So something so easy like this, when people assign such importance to it, I guess they're like, I don't want to screw it up. I don't want to take any chance. I'd rather you do it. So according to what we just read on martyrdom, I don't think it's complex. I think it's pretty easy. Um, but I don't know. I guess if you're giving your life for something, it might seem more complex. Um, any questions on martyrdom? Does it seem so complex? Because to me, the law on it is pretty easy to understand. Any questions? No? All right. So you're all ready to face this life or death situation and be confident that you made the right decision? All right. So how might the Rambam's criteria apply to contemporary issues? Social media or political activism? I think we just discussed this. Okay. The martyrdom, forced conversion, and Rambam's halakhic compromise. Must a Jew give up their life before professing belief in Islam or another religion? What does everybody think? Pop quiz. According to Rambam, do you have to do it, or can you say the Shahada? According to Rambam, you can say the Shahada. He doesn't consider it an idolatrous religion. And he also makes the point that this is where it comes in for another religion. He might make a distinction between Islam and Christianity, but he doesn't. He does consider Christianity to be an idolatrous religion, but you can profess your belief in Christianity because speaking words is not the same as doing an action. That's not the same as taking communion. It's not the same as bowing down to an idolatrous statue. So even though he could have given the simple answer, Islam, yes, Christianity, no. He gives a broad definition of the difference between words and action. So according to Rambam, you do not have to give up your life before professing belief in either one of these religions. His letter on apostasy was written to Jews facing persecution under Islamic rule, although he gave permission for other religions that he did consider idolatrous, like Christianity there. Controversy is balancing Kiddush Hashem through martyrdom with practical survival. And he gives you ways after the fact, if you didn't give your life, where you can still be considered a Jew in good standing after the fact. Okay, a Jew does not have to die rather than verbally profess belief in Islam. Worship, prayer, and sacrifice requires martyrdom. Mere verbal declaration does not. Saying I believe in Muhammad under duress is not an act of idolatry. The rationale is the lack of sincerity. The oppressor knows that the declaration is coerced and insincere, nullifying its idolatrous status. So, therefore, if the oppressor knows the statement is not sincere and that nullifies the statement, then wouldn't that also nullify the Avodah Zarah? If I don't have to give my life over a statement that was made under duress, then why would I ever have to give up my life under duress? If duress nullifies the sincerity in the statement, then the duress is a get out of jail free card. Hannah and the seven sons shows how some were not willing to renounce their faith, but did she have to do that? And should she have done that? Are any of you familiar with that story of Hannah and the seven sons? You can look it up. It's a terrible story. This woman named Hannah had seven sons, and they told her, "You need to eat pork or you need to eat something that's not kosher." She said, "No, we're Jews. We're not going to do that." So I forget who the guy was, but he killed one of her sons, and he said, "Now you're going to eat the non kosher food." She said, "We can't do it. We're Jews." So we killed the second one. And I heard about it in a shiur. The guy that told the story was very graphic about it. It's a much better storyteller than I am. And they went one by one and they killed all of them. And they got down to the last one and he said, "Look, as barbaric as we are, we're disgusted by what we're doing. Don't make us kill your last one. However, we have to do it if you don't eat it. Because once we declare something, we can't go back on it. The world will say that you can negotiate with us and that you don't have to listen to what we say. We don't want to kill your last son. We're begging you, please. Just take one bite. Spit it out. Just eat one bite. Have one son left and live." She said no. And she advised her son, "It's better to join your brothers and get killed." And they did it. So, should she have done that? I don't think so. This was pre-Rambam, so there was no argument that she could have pointed to. But there were other people in history that said, for lesser than the big three, that they would rather die. They would prefer to do this to themselves and their families. I think they were in error by making that choice, but it's not my place to just to say whether they were right or wrong. So the expected argument was that Islam is monotheistic. It's not a physical trinity, so professing belief would not be idolatry in Rambam's view. And he could have used that as an argument, as he does elsewhere for Islam, but he deliberately avoids it. He does not consider Islam to be idolatrous because they are monotheistic. They don't believe in a trinity. They don't have statues. They are very strict, even on drawings of things like Muhammad and Islam. You're not going to find statues of Muhammad in a mosque, I don't think. I've never been in one, so I assume there's not going to be any. So, other than words, I'm not sure there is an idolatrous act in Islam. His ruling applies even to Christianity, which Rambam does consider idolatrous, meaning you could impersonate a Christian, and that is not an act of avodah zarah. And many Jews in the Holocaust did. They snuck out, and some of them even gave their children to Christian neighbors to be raised as Christians. Better that they live as Christians than get killed as Jews, was their logic. Again, who can blame them in that situation? If coercion negates idolatry, why must one ever die for avodah zarah? The counter is that Rambam may be offering a heter leniency for persecuted communities, meaning his response was in response to a rabbi that was telling them, that you should be demonized because you weren't willing to die. So now here we are after the fact, and he's kicking them while they're down. So he was kind of being consoling and comforting to them. So that may have been why he said that to them, which contradicts what he says later in Mishnah Torah, which says he had an obligation to die. So it could be that he changed his mind or that he wasn't given a strict halakhic ruling here. He was trying to comfort this community because of what the unnamed rabbi said to them, which he was so offended by that he got involved. They didn't ask him for his opinion. He chose to write the letter to them. Okay, the Ashkenazi precedent. Medieval Franco-German Jews during the Crusades required martyrdom for Christianity. Rambam's view clashes with Tosafot and Ashkenazi tradition. Encouragement versus obligation. Uh, Permitted to, it's interesting. Tosafot, this was Rashi's grandsons and his students. Rambam considered Christianity idolatry for non-Jews because of the Trinity. Tosafot said it's not idolatry for non-Jews because they viewed the Trinity as one God, but different emanations, sort of like the Sephirot. So the Tosafot considered it not idolatry for non-Jews, but obviously he considered it idolatry for Jews that you have to give your life for. So that's an interesting dynamic there. Permitted to profess Islam to survive, but praiseworthy to choose martyrdom. If something is praiseworthy, okay, but that doesn't mean you've sinned if you didn't do it. Like the example that it's praiseworthy to return a lost object to a non-Jew, even though it's not a mitzvah to do it, it's praiseworthy to do so. However, that doesn't mean you violated everything. You didn't do something that was praiseworthy. Critique contradicts Rambam's own rejection of voluntary martyrdom in Mishnah Torah. It could be that later he changed his position, but it's more likely that he was being compassionate and trying to comfort a community that was told by the unnamed rabbi that they were wrong for not giving up their life and that they should stop fulfilling mitzvot. So perhaps in Mishnah Torah, he is extracting the law from the Talmud that says before the fact, the law is that they should be willing to give their life. But after the fact, since they didn't do it, he's telling them that it's okay moving forward. So even if it would have been better to have given your life and you didn't, then now you should move on to somewhere which is safe and rebuild your community after surviving whatever persecution you just survived. Sometimes to stand up for God, you might have to temporarily deviate a little bit from the halakha in order to give people encouragement. And by and large, the letter did accomplish this objective. The communities were built up and they did become Torah observant. Some of them professed this belief and then they were left alone to continue being Jewish in peace. The ultimate goal is to preserve Jewish identity and mitzvah observance. So the practical guidance is do mitzvot secretly. Any mitzvah performed under duress still counts. Escape persecution. Relocate to where Torah can be kept fully, even at financial cost. Rambam's personal example, he fled persecution with his family. He was actually even accused of converting to Islam by Jews. These were Jews that accused him of doing that. Post facto legitimacy. Those who submitted remain Jews. Their mitzvot are valid. Rav Soloveitchik's critique is that Rambam's argument are non-halakhic and meant to comfort, not legislate. Okay, well, in Mishnah Torah, he legislates that the halakha is you should be willing to die rather than convert to another religion, if that requires you performing actual actions of the Avodah Zarah. Historical evidence. Ashkenazi communities rejected this leniency. I don't think they should have, but I wasn't there advising anybody. I didn't have to go through it. So far be it for me to preach on what they should have done while they were in the trenches, and I was not. Okay, impersonation. Fake baptismal papers may be permitted, distinct from repudiation of Judaism. To escape Holocaust, dressing like a priest to be smuggled out was allowed under Pekuach Nefesh. Conclusion. His dual message was pastoral care to rebuild morale after forced conversions. Halakhic innovation redefines idolatry's boundaries under duress. Legacy, a pragmatic yet contested approach to Jewish survival under persecution. Questions. Should Holocaust prioritize survival or ideological purity in persecution? Well, I think it might be situation dependent, but I think the priority is on survival. Live to fight another day, and then preserve your ideological your ideology and survival of the people. That's where I think the priority should be. How does Rambam's view compare to other Jewish responses during the Crusades and Spanish Inquisition? I think there are individuals who would rather die and that are willing to do it. There's stories of Rabbi Akiva being happy as he was being skinned alive. And I'm asking, how can you be happy? He said, because ideally, we want the last words of our life to be the Shema. How many people were killed and didn't get to say the Shema before they died? Being happy to say that. I've seen people be skinned alive by cartels. I find it hard to believe that somebody would have the wherewithal during something like that to be able to do that. But we hear stories about it written hundreds of years later, by the way, hundreds of years after the event happened. The story was passed down and finally written down. So you can question the accuracy of the story, but they are there regardless. Can his arguments apply to modern dilemmas of Jewish identity under pressure? Yes. We're dealing with things today where these topics are still relevant. Okay, next lecture, false messiahs, his criteria for distinguishing true versus false messianic claims. This is something I do want to do. However, we've done I don't know, 6 or 7 of these. I don't know if you guys are tired of the Rambam series, but I have not gone through it, so I have not learned the next one yet. So either we'll continue next week with that, or we'll take a break and do something else. So then we'll continue later. So we'll vote off camera, see what everyone wants to do. And those of you watching on YouTube, you'll know next week what we decide.